Welcome, everyone. If people are still logging in here, I want to welcome everybody to our cloud webinar series. My name is Christina Bergman. I'm the marketing manager here at AVATA, and I will be facilitating our webinar. This is actually our second webinar in our cloud series as we look inside the latest features for EPM Cloud. Presenting for you today is Dwayne Hardacre, Managing Partner with AVATA, and we have a special guest from Oracle. We're excited to have Mark Seawald, Senior Director of Product Management for EPM, and Jennifer Fahey and Denise Turner, both EPM Solution Architects here with AVATA. So just a few quick housekeeping items. All attendees will be on mute throughout the presentation. This webinar is being recorded and we will make it available for everybody. Questions can be submitted throughout the presentation. You can do that in the chat window. And if we have time towards the end of the presentation, we will certainly answer those questions. So a brief agenda here. We've got an introduction about AVATA, and then Mark will talk a little bit about the EPM Cloud Roadmap, and Denise and Jennifer will cover EPM implementation insights. And as I mentioned, we will be doing some questions towards the end if time allows. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and give it over to Dwayne.
Thank you, Christina. Thanks, everyone. We have an exciting program today. I want to take 2 minutes to tell you a little bit about AVATA. AVATA has been an Oracle partner for over 15 years, and our roots going back to a specialized consulting company around manufacturing supply chain. But over the years, we've evolved where we have offices throughout North America, Europe, India, and Asia. So it's been a great journey. Today we have 3 core business units. Again, we still hold on to our roots in supply chain management, but over the years we've evolved into J.D. Edwards, and of course now cloud. And when we talk about cloud, we've evolved into cloud into 3 core areas: EPM, which is the topic of today we're going to talk about, ERP cloud, and SCM cloud. Cloud is nothing new to AVATA. Years ago, as a strategic partner of Oracle, we launched the first VCP SCM in the cloud on-premise, but bundled into a cloud model. So we've been doing cloud to on-premise hybrid solutions for a number of years. So again, been involved in the cloud space, working with Oracle. Back in 2014, we became a co-development partner with Oracle, working on what you see today as their cloud solutions in the SCM space. But really what drives our secret sauce are 3 key components. First and foremost, our people. We were born out of the business. We're practitioners that learned how to use the technology in the real world, driving business solutions and increasing value. Our customer focus, because many of us sat in your seats as the customer, we understand what your expectations are, fears, pitfalls, and how to address these implementation and these solutions. And we give an absolute 100% focus on ensuring our customers at the end of the day receive value and the value that they expect. And last, we are able to go from strategy through execution. So whether or not this is we're implementing a EPM solution, planning, budgeting, or we're coming in and talking about metrics or organizational alignment around processes, we're able to take the strategy and take that all the way down to what that means into the software execution as well. So kind of a one-stop shop. So with that, you got a quick flavor of a little bit about AVATA, and I'm excited to introduce our guest speaker that's got some great information about EPM and what's happening in the marketplace and at Oracle. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mark Seawald.
And thanks a lot, Dwayne, for that. As Dwayne mentioned, we'll get into a little bit of an overview here of the EPM roadmap as well as some of the strategy. Anytime we present the roadmap and strategy here at Oracle, of course, we are obliged to present our safe harbor statement. So this is with respect to any forward-looking type comments. But we'll start out with just a little bit of where we are with the EPM Cloud. And really, by all accounts, we are really enthusiastic, obviously very happy with where we are with the customer adoption of the EPM Cloud. This slide gives you a few indicators of it, and you can see it's been broadly adopted. 2,500 plus customers, just about every industry, every country around the world. And these numbers are as of Oracle Open World back in October. And I'll just give you a little bit more insight into it. Up in the top right-hand corner, you can see 4,000 subscriptions. So what that means is in the EPM cloud, obviously there's different business processes you can adopt. You can adopt maybe the planning and budgeting cloud service. You can adopt our financial close, our tax reporting capability. So within that 2,500 customers, there are many customers that have adopted multiple business processes. So maybe multiple planning and budgeting processes, maybe a financial close and planning together. So again, nice adoption, good adoption across different size companies as well. Both some of the largest companies in the world, as well as smaller and medium companies. So nice broad adoption. Just to give you an example of some of those at Open World, again, back in October of this year, give you a couple of names of companies that presented. We had companies like Motorola, Royal Bank of Scotland, Hertz Rental Car, Caesars Entertainment, City of Oakland. So again, nice adoption around large companies. Making that transition to the EPM cloud. Another little bit of insight, we have large deployments as well. These are not just small deployments of cloud software. The other company that had presented at our recent conference at Kaleidoscope is Hilton Hotel Chain, has a large hotel level planning deployment of about 2,400 users around the world, planning at each individual hotel level across all 13 of their brands and about 4,600 hotels around the world. So nice level of adoption. And then just to give you a little bit more background on it, you can see here that actually the EPM cloud is not necessarily new. These are obviously, we acquired that over a period of a number of years. We launched our cloud on February 14th, so actually Valentine's Day of 2014. So we're coming up on about 4 years now in the EPM cloud. And again, you can see that a little bit about what we've released over the last 3 years. You can see it in our fiscal 2015, which is again 2014. We started with our planning and budgeting cloud service. So certainly our most mature product in the cloud, as well as narrative reporting, which is a pretty unique solution that allows you to manage not just the reporting of your numbers from an EPM perspective, but also managing the narrative around those numbers. A nice opportunity to kind of streamline the broader financial reporting process. Following up on that, in fiscal 2017, we introduced more capability into our planning and budgeting cloud. I'll be talking a little bit more about that in a moment, as well as rounding out some of our financial close capability. You can see we added an account reconciliation, helps you automate the reconciliation of accounts across the enterprise. We also added in our financial consolidation and close product. And then most recently in our last fiscal year, fiscal 2017, we continued to build that capability out with tax reporting, profitability and cost management, as well as some additional capability. And I'll talk about it in a moment, but we're just about ready to complete the EPM cloud capability with our final component, which is what we call Enterprise Data Management Cloud Service, which helps companies manage their metadata across all the different applications and business processes that consume that. And again, I'll talk about that in a little bit, but nice heavy investment into the EPM cloud, and again, broad adoption across a wide range of companies around the world. This is a slide we use to describe the broader EPM cloud, and there's a lot of information here on the screen, but I'll point out a couple of things in particular. If you look about 2/3 down the slide, you can see a row there that begins on the left-hand side with a reconciliation and goes all the way across to consolidation, tax, allocations, and planning. And that really speaks to all of the capability that we have from a business process perspective. And we can broadly categorize those into two domains. Everything to really support your planning, budgeting, and forecasting on the right-hand side of the screen. And then everything on the left-hand side of the screen really supports your financial close process. And then importantly, just the level above that, if you'll notice in the darker shade of blue, and I'll talk a little bit more about this in a following slide, but you'll notice that we, with the EPM Cloud, we really are addressing lines of businesses beyond finance. Obviously, the first icon here represents finance, and that's obviously what we here at EPM, or formerly known as Hyperion, are best known for, making world-class software for finance and accounting teams. But we've seen with the cloud really broader adoption of EPM style capability in other lines of businesses, like marketing, like the operations and supply chain. And again, I'll talk more about that in a moment. But importantly, it is now a comprehensive solution with this final component that we'll be adding in January, actually in just under a month. Complete EPM solution that offers our customers flexibility to deploy on-premise or cloud solutions and have that kind of support that hybrid deployment of EPM business processes. Now, I do want to talk a little bit about the customer journey. This is a question we get very frequently. Obviously, we have the opportunity to speak with lots of our customers, and sometimes if you have not made that first step to the cloud, we very frequently will have customers that ask, well, what is a logical next step to the cloud or first step to the cloud? And I'll talk about that starting on the left-hand side. Interestingly, we are actually seeing a pretty large number of net new customers, new to Hyperion or new to our EPM domain. What I mean by that is traditionally when you look at our on-premise deployments of software, obviously we have thousands of customers around the world using our on-premise software, but they tended to be large companies or in the upper end of the mid-market. What we're actually starting to see now with the cloud is pretty broad adoption across all of those spectrums. Obviously, we continue to see our traditional large and mid-sized companies adopting our software, but we're seeing a lot of smaller companies going to it. And I think what's interesting about that is I think it really speaks to the value of the cloud. We've made great attempts to really lower the total cost of ownership, ease the administration, make it easier to implement the software. And those are all qualities that are obviously valued by smaller companies, but also valued by large and mid-sized companies as well. So that's one of the journeys that we are seeing. In the middle, you can see existing Hyperion customers maybe have our existing footprint of EPM Hyperion software. So that could be HFM, that could be Hyperion Planning. And what we're seeing is those customers are shifting their workloads to the cloud. So they might take an existing application that's on-premise and then just convert one of those applications to the cloud. And that's important. I think a lot of people think maybe that cloud is a binary decision. You're either all in it or not in it. And that's not the case. We've made a great amount of effort to provide the tools and capability to facilitate kind of that hybrid deployment where you can support both on-premise and cloud applications. So a good example of that is actually in the planning domain. And we see this quite frequently. When you take a look at planning, budgeting, and forecasting, oftentimes there are discrete business processes within that where you might be able to move one of those business processes under the planning domain up to the cloud. So perhaps maybe you have a forecasting process as opposed to your annual operating plan, or maybe you have a divisional planning system that you can move to the cloud. So good, easy ways to kind of take that first step to the cloud, build up some confidence, build up some credibility, get that quick win, and then start a broader migration over to the cloud. On the right-hand side, you can see existing customers augmenting workloads. So that's kind of similar to the example I described in the middle. But a good example of that would be instead of taking an existing application, maybe there's a net new business process. For example, maybe you've acquired a company, or maybe you've expanded a product line, or maybe there's an operational use case that you want to address has been maybe lower on your list of things you've wanted to address for quite some time, but you really couldn't build that business case. The cloud really lowers that threshold for investment in EPM-style business processes. So again, maybe taking and really augmenting your workload and starting that first step to the cloud. Next couple of slides, what I'll do here is I'll continue to kind of this same theme of talking about some of our strategy and some of our observations that we see across our customer base. And I alluded to this just a couple slides ago, but we really are seeing much broader adoption of EPM across the enterprise, not just within finance. And I think that's important. Obviously, finance has a strong need for EPM-style software, strong need for controls and governance. But there are many parts of the enterprise that hold a number. You have marketing teams out there that have a very substantial marketing budget. In fact, Gartner estimates for larger multinationals, the marketing budget is sometimes upwards of 10 to 11% of total revenue. That's a massive budget. And a lot of times, marketing departments want to focus on having greater controls around the decision-making, around how they invest in different marketing campaigns and the return they get on those marketing campaigns. HR teams often there will be long-range planning around skill sets. What's the demands on the workforce over the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years? What's the expected supply of the workforce? Is there an expectation of attrition or a significant amount of retirements coming up? Planning that kind of information out. Also down at the bottom, you'll see operations and supply chain planning, and linking that into more of an integrated business planning process where you might be, coming up with those those demand plans and linking that back into the supply chain. So really, I think what has made this possible, we certainly have seen some adoption outside of finance of our on-premise software, but not broadly. I think the cloud is what's made that enabled. I think the cloud lowers the threshold of investment and allows stakeholders to take ownership of it. And it's, in general, because of the investments we've been making around ease of use, it's easier to maintain. So those stakeholders can take ownership of their system. So an important theme, and I think that helps finance kind of keep everything connected with the operations. Really addressing some of those operational planning scenarios, and in particular narrative reporting as well. Another important theme here is really considering, what is your cloud roadmap? Obviously, if you have a significant footprint of on-premise software, many of you may be on the webcast here, maybe an existing Hyperion customer. You may be considering an upgrade. Maybe you're on an older version of Hyperion, 11.1.2.3, and you want to go to 11.1.2.4. That's a really good time to maybe stop and consider, hey, well, instead of maybe applying those resources to upgrading your on-premise software, maybe you should consider taking those same resources and making that first step to the cloud. Obviously, when you're looking to do an on-premise upgrade of your software, that usually involves a hardware refresh. That usually involves a fair amount of time from your team, a fair amount of expense as well related to that. So again, those same resources could be reallocated to the cloud. And I think what's important under that kind of sub-bullet there is that as you think about maybe that first step to the cloud instead of an upgrade, it gives you an opportunity not just lift and shift your planning process or lift and shift your financial close process to the cloud, but really take advantage of some of these innovations that have been introduced into the EPM cloud that maybe aren't available to you from an on-premise perspective. Another important trend that we're seeing, obviously we ask our customers really to be conscious of our roadmap, and we're seeing customers adopting some business processes a little more rapidly than others. The business processes certainly right now that are being adopted and have been adopted for the last couple of years, definitely planning, obviously planning being our most mature business process in the EPM cloud today, and account reconciliations. So if you have our on-premise account reconciliation product, or if you're using a third-party product, maybe like a Blackline or a Trintech, if that term is coming up in the contract, that might be a good point in time to consider that migration to the cloud. And then also somewhat related to that is you'll see Hyperion Financial Management. Although we have had a nice level of adoption in the financial close domain of our cloud capability, tends to have been smaller and medium-sized businesses or businesses that tend to have a lower level of complexity in their financial close. Really for those customers of ours that are most complex in their financial consolidation, maybe you have things like an equity pickup or minority interest calculations or complex scenarios like that. A lot of those customers are waiting for 2018, and I'll talk more about that. We have some pretty significant enhancements coming to the EPM cloud that allows customers to really make that have a full parity between HFM and our financial close capability in the cloud. Another thing to consider, and I've kind of alluded to this already, but really one of the things we recognized very early on, actually even before we launched our cloud, is we recognized that there's going to be a period of time, and quite frankly, probably a material period of time, where customers are not going to be 100% in the cloud. As wonderful as the cloud is, you simply can't just snap your fingers and move all your financial and operational systems up to the cloud. Obviously, that kind of migration will take a period of years, 5 years, 10 years maybe. So one of the things we've been investing in, from day one in our EPM cloud is providing that architecture and infrastructure to allow a hybrid deployment, whether it's your ERP that's still on premise or whether it's maybe your part of your EPM landscape that's still on premise. We're trying to provide all the right tools to make that very manageable. So we've introduced capability like EPM Automate, and I know here later on in the presentation we'll talk a little bit more about this, but capability that helps you manage that data, metadata, business processes in general between on-premise and the cloud. Some of the important things that we've seen develop over the last year, in particular with our partner community like AVATA, working closely with our customers, is we are starting to see best practices. There are best practices around managing your metadata and your master data. There are best practices around security and in particular data integration. Data integration is commonly one of the bigger concerns, but best practices have started to form. We've been in the cloud now for 4 years. We're past that early adopter phase. And again, many tools and capability are available to you to help manage that. And again, partners like AVATA are excellent at sharing that kind of information. So let's move on a little bit into one of the products. Obviously, with the scope of time here, I won't be able to go through everything, but do want to talk a little bit about the planning domain. Planning is certainly one of our most broadly adopted business processes, and particularly with our enterprise planning capability. And this is a capability that we've been obviously continually adding to on a update by update basis. It really is a significant step forward from our existing on-premise planning capability. It was really rethinking everything around the planning domain and delivering it in a way that allows you to configure customer-specific and industry-specific requirements. So you're very flexible planning platform, but still allows that platform to be upgradable in the cloud. So you get all that value. So you're no longer thinking about that upgrading your system every 3 or 5 years. And you can see across the bottom some of the out-of-box business processes that we have with that planning cloud. You can see strategy, which represents our strategic modeling capability. I'll talk more about that in a moment. Financials, which is a fully integrated income statement, balance sheet, and cash flow planning. Also able to do that in much more of an incremental fashion. So if you want to do maybe a quick deployment of revenue planning or a quick deployment of expense planning, then maybe over time start to adopt things like balance sheet planning or cash flow planning. That's a perfect capability. And then the next couple of items, things like workforce planning, capital asset planning. These are really fundamental to most organizations from a finance perspective. And again, really offers you that opportunity to do those incremental, quick win type implementations. And the last framework on the bottom you can see there is projects. I'll speak a moment about that. Project financial planning. Project financial planning is very well suited for certain industries like construction and engineering. They're also well suited for certain operational scenarios like marketing departments, like IT departments, like R&D departments. And anyone who's going to be organized more around projects or campaigns, very good scenario or framework for planning in that domain. So let's finish up here my portion of the presentation with a little bit about what's new and what's coming. One of the bigger new pieces of capability we brought into the cloud came in this summer is strategic modeling. Strategic modeling is really kind of the reimagined Hyperion strategic finance. So for those of you who are existing Hyperion customers and may be familiar with HSF or Hyperion strategic finance, this is a capability that allows you to do long-range scenario planning. So what if, maybe you're doing scenario planning around different economic scenarios, best case, worst case. Maybe you're doing long-range planning around funding scenarios, funding between debt versus equity versus a combination, maybe treasury scenarios, maybe M&A scenarios. All these are typically done in, a lot of times in most organizations, in Excel spreadsheets. And this is a tool now that's fully integrated into the enterprise planning domain and included in that framework for the same price. So it allows you to do more of that top-down planning alongside of your more traditional annual operating plans that tend to be more bottoms-up in nature. So, very excited to bring that to market. Our customers have been eagerly awaiting that, and quite powerful. Another important set of capability here that's going to be coming in the near future, actually, we're estimating, again, safe harbor applies, but we're estimating around the February timeframe, so just a couple months from now. We'll be extending some pretty significant features in our financial close domain to really support those complex consolidations. And I alluded to that earlier as well. So for those most complex HFM customers of ours, this is very exciting news. A lot of more complex consolidation customers have been waiting for some of these enhancements. Things like additional dimensionality. You can see there additional 6 custom dimensions up to 17 in total. Additional configuration capability around some of the calculations. Again, just in general, handling more complex consolidations like minority interests and equity pickup and so forth. Also on the bottom there, the last note mentions some of the investment we're making around some innovative areas like RPA, or robotic process automation. We think in particular the financial close domain is very well suited to that. We are introducing an incremental fashion capability to really support greater automation through robotics in the financial close domain. And then the last slide here, again, very exciting. As I alluded to earlier, the final component of the EPM cloud really is what's foremost from an on-premise perspective is known as DRM, or data relationship management. This addresses those metadata relationships around the enterprise. One central piece of capability to maintain. So when you're setting up metadata, you maintain it once, and it gets propagated out to all the different applications with the appropriate governance around that all at once in a very controlled fashion. I think that's a really important component, obviously, in particular for the managing that hybrid deployment. When you've got systems that are on-premise and you've got systems in the cloud, it's crucial to keep that metadata aligned, and our Oracle Enterprise Data Management Cloud service is perfect for that. So you can think of this as DRM in the cloud, but it is a completely reimagined solution. And we've named it our Enterprise Data Management. So it helps you manage enterprise data, which is another way of saying metadata. Also, a little bit different between our new Enterprise Data Management Cloud as compared to DRM. It tends to allow you to deploy this in a little bit more incremental fashion. A little bit less investment up front to start using this capability. Maybe you just want to use it with just 2 different applications. Very quick to deploy that and cost effective as well. So with that, that is a whirlwind tour of our roadmap and strategy. Hopefully that sets the stage, and I know AVATA and Jennifer in particular is going to go through some more details around some of the best practices and considerations with respect to the EPM. So with that, I will pass it off to Jennifer.
Great. Thank you so much, Mark. Welcome, everyone, today. Again, my name is Jennifer Fahey. I'm going to just be taking you through some of the what we're noting here is EPM implementation insights, just some of what we've seen to be able to bring success to customers. So I just want to start at this point, just starting with the basic. How is it done today? How is it done today? We need to understand your current process, and just as a precursor, that the focus really around this discussion in terms of from a cloud perspective is around PBCS. So that's really the framework from which we're focusing on this part of the webinar today. So understand the current process, absolutely critical to a solid implementation process. And that's going to come back to really asking those questions up front. Are we talking budget, forecast, quarterly forecast? How many iterations of that budget do you typically do? When do you consider it final? So just some of those key questions. How long is your budget process today? Are you doing revenue and expenses? Are they budgeted at the same level? And then one key piece as well is, how is that data currently collected? Are there common templates across locations globally, by cost center, by BU? Or are they just coming in disparate, basically pieces of information that someone's currently rekeying in your world today? That collection and how you're doing that today and understanding that process is absolutely a critical point for us to understand. What other pieces are you looking to incorporate in? From an HR perspective, are you looking for the workforce component off of that? Are we trying to include that as well? How are you doing that today? And then from that, what type of reporting? What type of reporting do you provide based on, is it actual to budget, actual to forecast comparisons? And then from any of the reporting that you do off of that, how are you creating it today? Is Excel-based, for example? Or, and how is that being distributed? How is that being distributed out to folks after that? And of course, identifying any struggles within the current process. Pain points, as they're commonly referred to. Where are we hitting obstacles today so that we can start to now then look towards the future? I'm just going to flip in within there. We also want to, as part of that, once we're understanding the current process, is the ability to clearly identify the reporting aspect versus the planning aspect. So what's coming out versus kind of what is going in. The reason that's going to be super important to delineate within there is because it gives us the ability to identify the opportunities to use PBCS because under the covers, it can really effectively organize the data so that we're able to really promote more efficient planning and budgeting while at the same time provide robust reporting. We don't have to give on one side or the other there because of the features of PBCS and the way that it can be stored in the back end. So really understanding how that's identified today so that we can organize it under the covers correctly. That has to do with multiple plan types. Now, in the planning world, we call these individual databases within the planning application, we call them plan types. For those of you who have already have implementations from either an on-prem perspective or you've looked at the tool and been doing some of your research there, those plan types, there are multiples that we can have, and the way that we organize them can not only facilitate things from a process perspective better, but also, as I mentioned, the ability to potentially have a reporting plan type that can handle the reporting aspect and then let us focus on the planning input for the other plan types. I'll talk a little bit more about that as we go forward. Other considerations when we're talking about this, especially from a capturing perspective of historical data. How much historical data do you want to hold within there? What level of detail are we going down to? I'm going to break that out in a future slide in just a moment. And then from a process breakout, are we looking at this from revenue-based, expense-based? Do we want to break those out? There may be reasons that would push us towards that ultimate goal. So just a couple of considerations there. One of the things that we like to talk about here that we found to be very successful, certainly in some of the implementations that I've been a part of, modeling early in the architecture process, can't stress that enough. That allows us, in following AVATA's Agile methodology, the ability to perform a manual build to validate any of these assumptions that we've been able to capture from the requirements gathering. To basically say, okay, based on what we know, let's go ahead and get something in. And PBCS makes that so capable, where it's so feasible to do that because the ability to quickly stand up the planning application. And to be able to go in and go ahead and get in some hierarchies within there, even some mocked data if possible. And what we often find is the discovery of elements of the data may emerge. So, for example, you know, as we're starting to load some of maybe that historical data or some of the actuals within, we notice, and we're trying to establish the metadata associated with that, we find that we have like 11 different miscellaneous expense accounts serving the same purpose. So the question is, does that offer us some opportunity to say, hey, you know, we don't really need to see all of those. We don't need to plan at those 11 different ones. We can actually just get that in and have a single miscellaneous expense account that we can do our planning and then ultimately to be able to report and do variance analysis off of as well. But we really suggest getting that initial build within there. Now, as we're looking at this, the ability to see some of that, we're able to use SmartView, which is the add-in within Excel that will allow us to tap right into the planning application and be able to pull that in a familiar environment, as you can see, to be able to maybe see some of the different data elements. But the point is, and what I'd love for you to walk away with at this point, is we don't have to have everything in place to be able to start some of this initial modeling. And in fact, it gives us great visualization into, oh, you know what, that's really not the structure we're looking for there. And when I drill in here, that's not intuitive. It allows us to really kind of garner some initial things very, very quickly and up front. Build for tomorrow. So now we have an understanding of what that current process is. Now we're building for tomorrow. What is it that we're trying to get to? Well, key to that is understanding the capabilities of the tool. One of the things that we found to be very, very useful is to make sure that everyone from a project team perspective has seen the tool, actually give a tour and understand the capabilities. So if I'm a planner and I want to put my planner hat on, I need to understand what the planners can see, what options they have. What are all those bells and whistles that planning has out there? And that can really add true value to the build process and alleviate time wasted when something isn't a fit for the tool. So we're talking about all the good things that we can do. We also need to understand where it might not be a fit, or we need to find other alternatives within the tool in terms of the process. But understanding all of the capabilities is absolutely key. Highly recommend going ahead and make sure the project team's educated on that side. Define quick wins and ultimate goals. You know, we use these buzzwords sometimes, but they are truly, truly applicable here. Specifically, quick wins. For example, can we just go ahead and immediately eliminate the rekeying of collected budget data, forecast data that's coming in? Those quick wins, somewhere where someone's been spending an inordinate amount of time trying to do that collection and rekeying, can we eliminate that by getting those templates in and being able to submit directly to the planning application? Can we go ahead and provide key financials by pulling, you know, needed actuals, historical data from the source system, so we can go ahead and get things from a reporting perspective? Even if everything is not perfectly in place from the planning side, could we utilize the application to go ahead and do some really needed reporting? Denise, I think a little bit later, is going to share an example of exactly that and what we've done on that side. All right. I'm going to go back for just a second in terms of, you know, our ultimate goals, stepping ahead just a little bit there. Are we talking about ultimately, are we talking about replacing existing budgeting solutions that are already in, completely doing that? And if so, what if we're looking at this? We're going to need to identify the appropriate phase-based approach within there. And that can come in several levels. One example I like to talk about is workflow. The ability for a planner to go in, for example, enter in their budget forecast information, and when they're done, be able to promote that to their manager. So they're promoting their plan. That workflow, as it can be designed within planning, is a solution that is there. Is that something that necessarily has to go in the first phase? Maybe or maybe not. That could be a great second or third phase. Or let's even think about it from another perspective. Maybe only a certain portion of the organization does that. A set of cost centers test out the workflow and see how that fits from an overall perspective. All right. Key design considerations. I alluded to the fact a little bit earlier. We're talking about plan types. Some of the things that we'll need to determine: how many. Planning has some underlying capabilities for us in terms of how that is utilized. How many we'll need to identify, and that's going to be driven often by what's the purpose. Is it going to be broken out, as I mentioned before, by revenue, by expense? Is it going to be more regionally based? Is it going to be a financials application versus maybe our core reporting application that we identify within there? But that's definitely one of our key points that we have to hit. Design considerations relative to our dimensionality. For those of you not as familiar with some of the key terminology within here, when we speak dimensions, we're speaking of just those data elements that are key to your process, that are key to your reporting and analytics, that are key to your day-to-day. Those often come in the flavor of your account structure, your metrics, your organizational structure, which we refer to as entity. That could go down to the cost center level, for example, BU, location. Then time, we have other dimensionality within there. Now, there are 6 core dimensions that are required from a planning perspective, but then we also have custom dimensions that we have the ability to add within there. With that, and particularly on the account dimension, one of the key design considerations that we like to bring to light very early is consider the level of granularity carefully. How low do we need to go in our account structure to be able to facilitate the task at hand, the process at hand, our planning, our budgeting, our forecasting? Back to my miscellaneous department expense example, do we need every single account within there? Or can we have a single miscellaneous department expense within there? Having that level of granularity and having that focus, that's where I've personally seen things get very, very convoluted when folks try to shove absolutely everything in a planning application when the process itself then gets convoluted. We need to actually plan for and at that level desired. So be considerate of the granularity that you choose and base that on that process. One of the great pieces of PBCS, it extended from the on-prem as well. It's been an underlying component of the tool and its underlying database structure, is the ability to do what are known as alternate hierarchies. If you have an environment today, you may have heard them referred to as shared member rollup. What this great capability gives you is the ability to take your core members, your core, call them locations, call them business units, cost centers, and be able to say, okay, maybe we roll them up from a company perspective, and that's the core way that we do our reporting. But we absolutely need to do things, plan things, report things at a different look and feel. In the example over on the right-hand side on the screenshot that you see there, we have locations, and we group them in different ways to be able to get different look and feel. The example here is we're able to take our location by company, by warehouse. You'll see a list there. We're also able to take and identify locations that are closed locations that potentially we're looking at from a historical perspective, and they are grouped together. This means that planners, folks doing their reporting, they don't have to reinvent the wheel and do all of this from a front-end perspective. They can go in and select their path, they can select their vantage point, and it's all collected there for them. Some examples that you also see, we have location by square footage, location by state, different ways to roll up the same core information, a very valuable component within the tool itself. Modeling. From a modeling perspective, this is where really the power of scenario inversion alignment come in. The ability to say that for a given budget, I would like around 1, around 2, around 3, and then ultimately a final. And to be able to take the delta between those versions during the budgeting process, during the forecast perspective. We have the ability to do that across the board. That's one of the very powerful pieces of PBCS itself in the planning tool. Another example would be a high forecast and a low forecast, to be able to do some of that what-if capability within there. And it's not fixed. We don't have to know every possible scenario that you could really garner at the initial requirements gathering perspective. We have the ability to, and the flexibility to add that when needed. Maybe now I want a quarterly forecast. Maybe I want to add that on the fly. Very flexible in that right. Business rules. Okay, we have our data in either from an input perspective, or we've loaded actuals, we've loaded our historical data. So now I want to see it entity-wide. I want to see it totaled up. The ability to run business rules and ultimately consolidate your data so that you're able to see it really at any level you want to report at, and maybe a departmental level, maybe at a total business unit level, total company, but the ability to roll that up. The ability to do things like copying our data. Perhaps on our initial onset for our budgeting process, I want to take the prior year actuals, maybe do across the board 2 to 5% increase, and seed the budget data, have our starting point for that. We have the ability to do that through data copies using business rules. Allocations. Maybe we have data at a departmental level that we really want to take and then spread and allocate out accordingly. Allocations can be handled through those business rules as well. And finally, I just wanted to kind of allude to our data sources. All of this magic then is going to be facilitated by the metadata, the hierarchies themselves, and the data that we get. And from that sourcing perspective, that's where I'm going to turn it over to Denise, and she's going to talk about how we can get all that great data in there. Thank you. Over to you, Denise.
All right, thanks, Jen. She kind of gave a great overview on project bases and high-level planning and budgeting. And I want to, I guess, kind of maybe start getting into some of the nitty-gritty of data. Ultimately, successful companies spend more time analyzing their data than they do gathering that data. And so ultimately, everything that we've talked about would be a moot point if we didn't have the underlying data. So one of the things that I want to talk about today is the ease of integration from PBCS Cloud to on-premise. I don't care whether you're going from or to, back and forth, part of it's here, part of it's there, part of it is a sales project or database. It's not a problem. We will find ways to put the data back and forth, and there are tools in place for cloud to help facilitate that, and I'll go over that in more detail in a further slide. But basically, my point is I can get you data from anywhere and put it into PBCS and vice versa. And part of our job is to help you decide, well, what's the best way to get that data? Now, that data could be simple data entry. It could be some type of manual integration that the user's going to just do themselves on a monthly basis, all the way up to a completely automated integration. And obviously, in the end, we'd all love the automated integration, but I want to caution here that we don't get hung up on this integration and complete automation at the beginning of the project. I have seen this integration and automation become literally the downfall of a project to go lives getting pushed out months simply because of this, and that does not need to be the case. So along those same lines, obviously, we're going to be dealing with data conversion. Now, data conversion, reports are only as good as your data. I mean, you've heard that said before, and I just have to reiterate it because it's so true. So when Jennifer referred to, what does your current process look like? Well, we want to understand that current process so that we understand your data and we understand what drives your data and the relationships so that we can, start to think about how are we going to convert this data? How is the data going to be interfaced between different systems going forward? So we really want to understand that. One of the other things I can't say strongly enough is please do not underestimate the value of taking time to convert your data correctly. I've had people who are just, oh, let's just throw it in, it doesn't matter, it'll be right going forward. Or maybe, well, we'll convert our 2017 data properly, but let's not worry about 2016 and prior. And then you can see in my example here, this is a report from a real life customer who said those exact words to me, and I tried to talk them out of it. And we literally went back in and reconverted 2016 data, because you'll see this report is comparing current year to last year. Well, this report, if you don't convert last year's data properly, this report is basically a useless report for the next year. And so again, once they really started to see the reports that I was creating for them, and they started to realize, oh yeah, we need to go back and make sure we do this right from the beginning. And then of course, we want to ensure that all the data ties out. So that's just a little blurb there at the end. Now I mentioned that there's different ways to, get data into the system. Obviously, there is data entry from SmartView, which Jennifer had showed you a little screenshot of that, to forms and different ways that users can add it manually, to the tool that comes with the cloud PBCS is, it's called FDMEE, or data management. Some people don't like to call it FDMEE in the cloud, and some people prefer to call it data management. They're very, very similar tools to on-prem FDMEE. But here's where it's very easy to set up some source and target systems, to set up your formats and locations, and set up some mappings and rules. And in this screenshot, and I'm going over this so high level, you can see in this screenshot where we have like source company, and then it's getting converted to that entity. Source account code is getting converted to that account code. And just a little taste of how wonderful this tool can be in helping you map that data, whether it's a one-time conversion or whether it's an ongoing interface. It's just a really, really easy tool. Now, ultimately, we talked about how ultimately we would want to automate these processes. There's also a tool that comes with PBCS called EPM Automate, and that tool helps you move files around and kick off processes programmatically, as opposed to a user actually going into, say, this data load workbench and manually uploading a file and processing it through. So again, just lots of ways to get data in and out of the system. So I would just encourage you to, some people get a little bit scared when they talk about all this data, and it's really simple. And we're here to help you, guide you through that process, and even the data conversion. I know sometimes people feel really daunted by that, and please don't, because we can help you break it apart, and you'll be amazed at how quickly it can happen. And I want to just talk a few final tips and tricks. I know even Mark had mentioned this, and then Jennifer as well, is to focus on the quick wins. And again, I think that is huge. One of the things I also tell my customers when I'm first, finding out, well, what are your needs, and what are your pain points and things like that. Don't assume anything. Don't assume that this is what the product does, and this is that the product can do this and it can't do that. That's my job. Just tell me exactly what your needs are and what your wish list is, and then let me tell you what the system can and can't do, or from a cost benefit perspective, what might benefit you the most. And one of my examples for the quick win is and this is just actually a recent customer and a recent go live, where they were really struggling to go live in a timely fashion so that the board could have their reports. They wanted to see them in a particular way. And obviously that's one of the wonderful things about PBCS and reporting is, being able to slice and dice your data in different ways, and, get meaningful information to the right people. Well, they thought that they needed to go live all or nothing with planning and budgeting in addition to reporting. And once I understood that the need was that the board just wanted to see their reports, I said, hey, let's take a step back. We converted all their actuals data. We converted previous budget data. We put all their reports together, got them to the board. Board was happy as a clam. And then a month later, we're going live with budgeting process. So again, don't assume anything, and understand that we can do a phased approach, especially I think EPM, a lot of times there's more room for a phased approach than some other types of software. The other thing that I like to do is get the users in early so that they can understand and own their data, which Jennifer also talked a little bit about with the early prototyping. Once we start working on some data conversion and get your dimensions in and things like that, we like to actually do smart view training I would say within a couple weeks of the project, again, so that users can really understand their data and really own that data, and really play a part in developing the reports and planning processes going forward. And then, of course, we have to mention that obviously you should be very careful about who you choose as an implementation partner. And I really believe that this is important when you look at AVATA's methodologies and experience. It really helps us reduce the risk for our customers because, we've seen it and done it. It also helps us that we can identify these quick wins and maybe get you live a little bit more quickly and more efficiently. So that was what I had as far as the data, and hopefully this was helpful to you, and I will pass it back over to Christina.
Thanks, Denise. For those attending any of our cloud webinar series, we have a cloud roadmap and scoping assessment offer. So if anyone's interested in learning more about that, please contact us at connect@avata.com. And then coming up next is our cloud webinar series on January 23rd. We have VCP to SCM in the cloud. You can register for this or really any of our upcoming webinars on our website. And this is our last slide. We really have come to the end of our hour. And so if anyone has further questions, they can feel free to reach out to us. We'd be glad to answer those. We invite you to contact us, visit our website, follow us on social media. Please reach out to us if you care to know more. I would like to thank Dwayne, Mark, Denise, and Jennifer for their time today and for sharing their EPM Cloud insights. And for everyone who attended, enjoy the rest of your day wherever you are. Thank you.